I'm so grateful you're with us. We've been in this conversation right here called Unlearning Empire, discovering a new way to be human. And what we're doing is we're reorienting our psyches, our souls, our minds, our bodies, our consciousness around a new way to be human. And the best example of a new way to be human, I believe, is found in what is called the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount is a collection of Jesus' greatest hits. So it's Matthew 5, 6, and 7. There's also Luke has a version, which is a little bit smaller, and his version is a lot different. But Matthew 5, 6, and 7, if you were summing up the teachings of Jesus, the life of Jesus, that's where you'll find some of the greatest statements Jesus has ever made, all collected and put together, all right? So we're working our way through, and today I want to finish the introduction of Jesus' sermon, okay? So we're going to end what is known as the Beatitudes today. And I don't know about you, but it's been a lovely start to his sermon. I like these Beatitudes. I like that Jesus started with the poor. I like that Jesus started with those who are mourning. I like that Jesus started with those who are merciful, with those who hunger and thirst for righteousness or justice. I like that Jesus started with the peacemakers. For all of you going out and creating peace in the world, shalom. I love that Jesus starts with all of you people, the outsiders, the marginalized, the outcast, those who've been pushed to the edges, the overlooked, the weary, the grieving, the exhausted, the marginalized, the burnt out, and all of you barely hanging on right now. God starts with you and says you are in a good condition in the realm of God. So the empire says to you, you're an outsider, you're no good, you're worth nothing, and Jesus steps up and says, actually, the empire's had this whole thing backwards. In the kingdom of God, the realm of God, in the divine world, you are actually sitting at the center. Or in essence, you could say it like this: God is on your side. And if there's anybody I want on my side, I love that it is the divine. This is how Jesus starts. Now, what I want to do today is, last week we looked at the peacemakers. Now we're going to jump down to his last beatitude. Now, this one's different because it's not just one statement. A lot of scholarship says he makes the statement, which we're about to read, and then he uses the next verse, which some scholars say is a different beatitude, but I'm pushing them together for two reasons. One, for the sake of time, because this is like part 9 of our series, and we're still in the intro. Which means we're going to set records on this one, all right? And I'm looking forward to it. But the other reason is, I don't know if if we're dealing with 2 Beatitudes here, or if we're dealing with one Beatitude, and for the first time we're getting an explanation of that Beatitude. And that's how I understand it. Either way, we're going to take on like more than one verse today, okay? So this is Matthew chapter 5, verse 10. Here's the final Beatitude Jesus gives. Blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Verse 11, blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Can we just pause there? Anybody ever experienced that? Rejoice and be glad. It seems a little strange, doesn't it? I'll be glad for your suffering. For your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. They persecute you. So, here's the idea. Jesus says, blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness. Then he breaks down the description of what that persecution might have looked like in its first century context. Now, when I first read this, I almost skipped it. And skipped it, I mean in the way of, I'll just make a reference of it and move on, but we'll get to what's next, which is you are the salt of the world, you are the light of the world. And a part of it was because, honestly, I read it and I thought, I don't know that this is going to translate to an American empire that really knows nothing about persecution. I mean, honestly, if anything, I don't know about you, but these verses, this idea of persecution, I mean, so much of it is hard to even hear, not because it doesn't exist, we can get into that, but because the way I've watched this very idea be stretched so far from beyond what Jesus even meant. And we're living in a moment in America where people, I don't know if you've noticed this, claim they are experiencing persecution because of their faith. And then they'll make references to this verse. Well, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And I don't know if you see this, but I see it. I see people all the time claiming that as a Christian living in America, they are persecuted for their faith. Okay? And so part of the reason I didn't want to address it is because of that. But then I realized, oh, actually, that's why you should address it. Because there are American Christians claiming to be persecuted. And when you lean in and say, tell me about the persecution, you start to realize there's something we need to talk about here. Because people have confused, and here's where we're going, people have confused losing supremacy to persecution. And when I say supremacy, I don't just mean white supremacy, I also mean Christian supremacy. And my friends, those two go hand in hand with each other. So, Christian supremacy is starting to slide in America, and all of a sudden what you see is, tell me if you've heard this, oh, I can already feel it, we're going to have a great day. I feel it. I feel it in my bones. You may not like it, I'm going to like it. But Christian supremacy, you start to lose the supremacy, and tell me if you've experienced this, you start to hear people talk about two things. One, the secularization of America. Pause. Friends, I don't even know what that means. When I hear people say that, the secularization, secular, the only thing that comes to my mind is the world I grew up in, the evangelical world, they called music secular. So you had Christian music and then secular music, right? And then you had contemporary Christian music, which is a merging of secular and Christian music. You know what I'm talking about, right? They brought the drums and the guitars and all of it, and it sounded like, and then the lyrics. I remember, I grew up listening to a band called Jars of Clay. Do you remember this? And I remember the crossover, which was the first time I'd ever seen it, where they made it on, and hang on, by the way, I know the students didn't go back to the back, so students, just hang with me. There's a thing called MTV back in the day. It's called music television, all right? And MTV is what we all older folks used to watch all the time. I mean, I would sit in front of that and be like, what new music videos we got going on today, all right? But I remember watching Jars of Clay move into, and I saw them on MTV. And then it became this big deal like, wait, are they Christian music? Because their lyrics don't really talk about Jesus. So are they secular or are they sacred? Like, which one is it? And then there were like the contemporary kind of progressive folks at the time going, ooh, that's how you reach people. Which honestly is kind of worse than the dichotomy of secular and sacred, right? Like, ooh, let's look like we're like them, but then we're actually disguising ourselves, and then boom, surprise, here's Jesus. Which now that I look back, I realize, my God, how ashamed were we of Jesus that we had to disguise him to get him in the back door? Because if we just walked up and was like, here's a Jewish rabbi who says, love your enemies. What do you think about this guy, right? No, instead we had to like dress him up and like slide him in the back door and then like, whoa, Jesus is in the room. Do you want to invite him into your life? But I remember watching, and they had this song called Flood. My world is a flood. Slowly I become one with the mud. You've heard this, right? And I remember sitting there like as a teenager going, I can't believe it. And it became this great debate in the evangelical church I grew up in of separating secular music and Christian music. And we had bonfires as students where we would throw our secular music into fire. I have said this for years. If you're new to this and you're like, I didn't grow up evangelical, well, you just hang on, all right? Because I'm going to tell you something. We had some experiences as evangelical kids that would blow your mind. We had youth group, and it wasn't like the youth group that happens back here with Garrett. We had Wednesday night bonfires where we would gather around, they'd light a fire, and then they would tell us to bring our secular music. And we had compact discs, and we would throw them in the fire and watch them burn and be set free, liberated from the stronghold of this secular music. And looking back now, I've said this before, but looking back now, I love it. You know, the music industry loved evangelical worlds because we would buy the music, burn it, then turn around and buy it again. So artists like Tupac Shakur made so much money off of me, all right? Because, man, when his All Eyes on Me came out, and I was living in East Tennessee around like a bunch of country cowboy folks, which is lovely, that's their jam, but I was like, woo, man, something about Biggie and Pac and that fight between the two of them, it was the Real Housewives of teenage world. It's what we had. And I know it sounds weird, but when a little white boy from East Tennessee is fully engrossed in this fight, I was throwing up West Side living in East Tennessee. In the mountains, I would walk through like middle school and being like, who does that? And I don't know what's going to happen when we die, but I'm going to be real. This is full transparency. I do hope whatever is on the other side, that there is some incarnation of our consciousness right now. Because when I get there are a couple people that I want to meet, and Tupac Shakur is one of them. And I'm telling you, hear me, because it's just serious respect for him. And now that I've gotten older, you ever go back and listen, I'm like, oh my God, that man was far more tapped in than, as a high schooler, I was just like, yeah, get him. But I don't know what I was doing in high school. I didn't understand a word he was saying. I just felt it, you know what I mean? But now looking back, I'm like, man, he was tapped in. Now, all of that said, I don't even understand that duality anymore, secular and secular. Because when you step through that door, you realize there's no such thing as secular. Everything is deeply sacred. Everything. But the reason I say this is because there is no place where the divine is not. Because even the writers of the scripture says, if you make your bed in Sheol, which is the place of the dead, you'll find the divine there. I know. I've been experiencing this lately. Katie's reintroducing me to music that I didn't grow up on. Because I didn't get to listen to secular music, all I heard was Christian music. So now Katie's having to reintroduce me to music. And I'm telling you, we're sitting down on Thursdays, Friday nights, sitting on the couch, and she'll play over the loudspeaker a song, and I'll be like, oh my God, listen to how deeply spiritual that is. Like, I'm talking about serious depth in these lyrics. I mean, no wonder. I was doing some writing and I had to try to get inspired, and so I was like, I always try to listen to something in the mornings to get inspired. And let me tell you who dropped into my feed recently, Prince. And that song, Purple Rain. Well, I'm like, what a great title. I don't even know what it means. What is Purple Rain? Purple, I've never seen rain that's purple. But I start listening to it. Then I listen to it again. Then I listen to it again. Then I listen to it again. And then I'm like, oh my God. And then I had to do a little research, and I'm like, wait a minute. Did you know he never explained what that song meant? One time, apparently, historically, they have one time where he made a reference to the song. But other than that, he as a good artist, he's kind of like, you get to decide what it means. But there was one time where he made a reference, and you know what he said the reference was? He said, oh, it's apocalyptic. Well, I'm a pastor, so I'm like, wait, Prince just talked about apocalypse? And he said, yeah. He said, purple rain is the blue sky when it meets the red blood of the war we're going through, and when they come together, they're purple. And so he's saying when it's raining all of the terror of the apocalyptic world in that moment, and you find somebody and y'all stay faithful together and love each other and hang on in the midst of it, you will get through it. And then you realize, then you bring in the music, which is even more inspiring, because he does his thing. But then if you notice in the song, he eventually stops singing, and he just like does this like this moaning like type thing. It's almost as if he's saying, the pain that we're walking through, it doesn't even have language. You just have to kind of just hum it, just moan it out. And then he moves from that to a full guitar solo, where it's just this whole riff of a guitar. And what it is you just feel this pain like in the guitar. And then I was like, my God, That is far more spiritual than Third Day. Do you know what I'm saying? Take any Christian music artist. Is anyone else having this experience when you deconstruct now, you go back and you're like, I was robbed. They gave me, and no offense, because I have friends that are in the CCM world right now, but they gave me this cheap imitation crab meat called Christian music when what I really wanted was the real thing. And turns out the real thing, and I remember this like it's secular if it has cuss words in it. Turns out, actually, that's called a lament. And that's deeply spiritual. And now I'm going back, uncovering all this music, going, no wonder it's lasted for decades. Here's why. Because it resonates with people. Yeah, because it's deeply spiritual. So I don't even see the dichotomy or the duality anymore between the two of those. Because everything is deeply spiritual. And when you start finding the divine in everything, I'm telling you people, you find it in everything. And there isn't a place you can go where the divine is not present. And you start seeing the divine everywhere. Yeah. What does that have to do with persecution? All of that to say, I think in America, what you have in this moment is a group of Christians who, as they lose supremacy, you start to have this narrative of we're being persecuted. And what they'll say is, we're experiencing, and here's the link, the secularization of America. And if it's not the secularization of America, then what they say, and there is no such thing as a secularization of America, but as that transpires, what they'll eventually say is, we're experiencing persecution, but it's also linked to what we call eschatology. Eschatology being the study of end times. So think about it. They're claiming persecution. And if you listen close enough, what you'll find is they want that persecution to happen. In the same way they want Israel to keep bombing Gaza. Why? Because it fulfills some violent prophecy and understanding that they have about the end of the world. And so anytime they can latch hold of something that they perceive as persecution, they'll claim it because that has to be the narrative. So the more power and supremacy Christianity gets, the more it actually is moving away from the eschatology that they hold, and that's problematic. Now, all of that said, this is what many people have called the American Christian persecution complex. Now, for those unfamiliar, I got you a working definition here. The American Christian persecution complex is the belief that Christianity is under attack whenever it is no longer given special privilege, cultural preference, or unquestioned authority. But let's tell the truth here, okay? Christianity and Christians in America are not being persecuted. Now, I want to show you some examples of the American Christian persecution complex, okay? One, you already know. Think about what happened a few years ago with Starbucks in their coffee cup. Think about that for a minute. It became this big uproar, and literally there are still fundamentalist Christians arguing about this, that there is a war on Christmas in America. And that a part of the war is that you can't say Merry Christmas anymore, but people are saying Happy Holidays. And notice what's happening here. That they see that as the secularization of America. Notice that. But notice what it really is. It's just a slight notch down of their Christian supremacy, and it is a realization and an awakening that not everybody in America is a Christian. That's what we call equality, all right? It's the idea that even in the Constitution, we were never intended to be a Christian nation. And so, it's not that you're going woke. It's that you're actually respecting the fact that not every human that lives within the realm in which you live believes the same God that you believe in. And that, my friends, is deeply spiritual. That's actually called dignity and respect. Now, I want to show you another one that just happened last week. Okay, this is fresh off the press. All right. I think we have an image of it. Here's a tweet. Here's a tweet. Here's a tweet. Literally, and we blocked the. We tried to keep the image so you could get close, but we blocked the name out so you won't persecute them even more. But this is an actual tweet that I saw with my own eyes, so I pulled it. And so you're like, what's going on? So Coca-Cola has a personalization tool. So you can go online, and with a Coke can, you can write your name or whatever, and then they'll send you like the drinks with your name on it. You know this, so you're familiar with this. Well, they now have it where you can do like small little like slogans or whatever. So it's a tool where customers can submit a personalized bottle or can. But the system that they use rejects and prohibits religious language, political language, trademark language, or inappropriate language. That's fair, right? Like, you don't want somebody being like blankety blank blank on your Coke can, you know what I mean? I don't want to receive a Coke can that's like, I hate Cody and Vining's Lake. I'm good. But some Christians got online and decided to try something. So they typed in, Jesus is King. And it was rejected, which we don't have time to go into it, but anytime I see Jesus is King, I want you to know that is code, okay? Because hear me when I say this in America in 2026, there is a distinct difference between saying Jesus is King and Jesus is Lord. All right? No. They tried to write it, it got rejected. Apparently, some Christians got on and tried to write something like, the devil is good. It got accepted. Immediately, the Christians are like, we're being persecuted. They present it to Coke, and Coke has to make a formal statement saying, we are not persecuting Christians. However, they did run a test, and there was a flaw in the system, and turns out, yep, we rejected a Jesus is King, but we did accept, Satan is number one or whatever, you know what I mean? And they're like, it was a flaw in the system, self-corrected, move on. Then they said, just so we're clear, we have prohibited any religious, political, trademark, or inappropriate language. But that didn't stop an uproar within Christian fundamentalists that just said, see, we knew it, Christians are being persecuted. So I heard about it, and then I got online, and I'm like, look at there. It's an actual thing, and this is out of the individual's mouth. Coke hates Jesus. And then listen to this line. The persecution is obvious. What's coming next is obvious. Notice what that individual just did. Notice how fast they moved from Coke hates Jesus, persecution is obvious, and then what's coming next. Now, what does he mean by what's coming next? So let's keep reading in context to see if he gives us a clue. Okay, check it out. Are you prepared for it, or will you crumble? Now, notice what the writer is doing there. He's leaning into the fundamentalist Christians going, will you be strong? Will you step up? Will you be ready? Now, ready for what? Line before, ready for apparently something that's coming. What is coming? He just keeps going. You need to be looking forward to what's coming up and start preparing now to defend your loved ones. All of that, and then you have sweet, lovely grandmothers online going, I'm ready. I'm ready. And I want you to know, I stopped all orders on Coke. And then hear me, and I'm not mocking, this is reality. This is not a mock, this is reality. And I am putting on the full armor of God, ready for the apocalyptic day. And then you'll hear this, it's just going to get worse in America. Now, you have to be careful because you can bust up in there like, what are y'all talking about? It's a Coke can. You could also bust in and go, oh, I see what's happening. This is a long narrative that's been around for a while. So what do we do with this? Perfect example. This is what we call the American Christian persecution complex. Here's what I would like to say about it. In America, Christianity has not lived on the margins. It sits at the center of power in our politics, our courts, and our institutions. And when Christianity becomes less culturally dominant, when minorities begin to gain a few rights, Americans begin to identify as Christians a little bit less, when Christian political preferences lose elections, many American Christians interpret that as, I told you, the persecution has begun. And they'll use lines like, Satan is attacking the people of God. My friend, I say this with all the love that I can muster within my heart. The issue isn't merely some Christians incorrectly calling themselves persecuted. It's that the persecution narrative can function to hide their own power and the impact on people with less power. Minorities are cast as the antagonist in that persecution narrative. Not people experiencing the consequences of our power, which is what is really actually happening. What I want to say to Christians with the American Christian persecution complex is you're not being persecuted. You're actually being challenged. You are not, those are not the same thing. This is a confrontation with your power. Because I don't know how to tell you this, but I say it as a Christian. But your religion has caused a lot of harm. And what I want you to know is it's not persecution. It's actually called accountability. And accountability is not persecution. Being challenged is not persecution. Losing cultural privilege is not persecution. Sometimes it's simply the consequence of a Christianity that has looked more like empire than it has Christ. What I would ask is a genuine question. Why are you so eager to be the victim of the story when Jesus keeps asking you to notice the people who are actually being victimized? And this is a part of the American persecution complex that is so dangerous because what happens is they lose a little bit of their supremacy, equality begins to rise, and then immediately they jumped into this victim mindset like, man, we're being attacked. And it is a great way to hide itself from accountability, from confrontation, from genuine people asking real questions of why your religion called Christianity has caused so much pain in the past and is still causing so much harm today. Yeah. This is a part of the dilemma when we talk about persecution in America. And if you're here and you say, well, how do you know? Here's the question that I have been leaning on to more and more. Every situation I bump up against, and sometimes it's clear to me, there are also gray moments. And I hope you all have some gray spaces. I hope you all have some policies that you see from the Democratic Party that you're like, I don't know about that. Because I don't know about y'all, but I don't want to be the MAGA party that says yes to everything. I don't want to be placed in a party with party loyalty and allegiance, walking blind just because I don't want that. No, I think a part of our task as Americans is to raise the bar, to say, actually, we're not just going to bring anybody in this office. We have some questions. And so for me, I don't care like who the label is. I have questions. There are people I love that are running, but I still have some questions. There are some fuzzy elements that I'm like, let's be clear about some of this. What do you mean? There are some things, this may shock you, I don't have the answers for. And I've done a lot of studying. I've talked to a lot of people dealing with it, and it's still like, that could go either way. Yeah, I know. It's a challenging thing sometimes when you get in. I know our ego would love for it to be black and white. But we have to be very careful because if you're not careful, what you've done is you've swung your certainty to the other side. But we walked away from certainty as a God. So we are now getting more comfortable being uncomfortable, not having all the answers. We call that trust. It is trust in the divine, but also accountability and challenge and confrontation and questions and asking. And so I want to make sure we're not just moving our black and white fundamentalism over here on this side and it's still black and white fundamentalism. This is why I love it. I love it when I see progressives and liberals arguing with Democratic politicians. I'm like, more of that, please. Because I think a part of the problem is we never had that on the right. A part of the problem, the challenge is that you just was like, well, this is the lane, this is the identity, this is the R beside his name, so let's just blindly go that way. No. The challenge for all of us is there are some areas that are very difficult and they're very challenging. And I think for us, it requires some serious thought and discernment and walking through what is it that we're actually trying to get under here. And so when I run into those moments where I don't know, and there are moments I don't know, I fall back on some things. You've heard me talk about these before, but here's a question I keep falling back to that I think is really helpful. In any situation, look at it and say, before I decide, who has the power here? That is, if you ask that question, nearly 99% of the time, you will find someone who has the power and someone who's on the underside of the power. Now, doesn't necessarily mean those on the underside of the power are right, but before you step in to make a decision, ask that question, who has the power here? And when you step into the American persecution complex, you realize, who has the power here? Oh, Christians have the power here. Yes, Christians have the power here. And so it gets real interesting when you untangle that and you realize, wow, isn't that interesting? The people who have the power are claiming to be persecuted. That would be like, let's take another step. That would be like a white male claiming to experience reverse racism. You see the correlation, right? And I meet people all the time still like, well, yeah, of course they can. No, actually, they aren't. Now, they are if you define racism as just being prejudiced against the color of your skin. But that's not racism. That's discrimination. Racism is about power. Do you understand that? And as a white male, got news for you, I've never had power enforced on me, against me, my body, my color of my skin. This is why reverse racism can't be a thing. But I'll tell you what it is good at. A whole bunch of white males love to pick it up and run with it. And honestly, it's really disturbing because it isn't just a blow to those who are marginalized. You're taking the suffering they have experienced, and then you're pulling it out and using it to further lift up and embolden your own supremacy. Friends, that's disturbing. That's evil. That's gross. I think we've already gone, Kevin. We ain't coming anymore. We already gone. Train left the station a long time ago. I'm saying you see the correlation between white supremacy and Christian supremacy. They are intertwined in a lot of ways. Now, Jesus says, blessed are the persecuted. So if it's not that, then you're probably like me and you're asking this question. Well, then what is it? What is he talking about? Remember, he's writing to a first century crowd here. I love how he words this. Blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness. That's critical. Remember what righteousness is. We've already talked about this in the Beatitudes. Righteousness and justice are intertwined together in Hebrew thought. You could say it like this. Righteousness is the incarnation of justice. It is the justice of God enacted. Jesus is essentially saying, blessed are those who are persecuted in the cause of justice. This is suffering because you have embodied the justice of God. I think it's critical also to note that Jesus doesn't randomly end with persecution, but he places persecution right after peacemaking. Why is that important? Because I think what he's trying to get at is, blessed are the peacemakers, those who go out and attempt to create peace. You are the most likely ones to actually experience some sense of persecution. It's like Jesus is saying, it's the consequence of everything we've been teaching. And this wasn't hypothetical to Matthew's community as he wrote it, because they were experiencing, as followers of Jesus, exclusion, economic consequences, social rejection, accusations of disloyalty, and full-on violence. You can study history, church history, and you will find people in the early Jesus movement were experiencing actual violence. And a part of what they were experiencing, there are actually stories that came out of that aren't in the Bible. And if you don't read outside of the Bible, then perhaps you probably don't even know some of these stories. But there were real people in the first century who experienced some serious, be a proper word, persecution. And experienced in many different ways. And part of the reason is because what they were teaching, believing, and confronting. But even now, looking back, we wouldn't necessarily call this Christian persecution. And the reason is because Christianity wasn't a thing in the first century. Now, you've heard me talk about this, but I do think it's important to clarify. There was never a day where Christianity broke from Judaism. Okay? When you study this, there was never like a defining moment where you're like, when did that happen? When did Christianity begin? There was never like a moment where it was like, oh, right there, we see it. Judaism and Christianity broke. No, what you need to know is when you open the Bible to read it, all of those people they're talking about in the Bible are a branch of Judaism. Christianity wasn't a thing then. And so what you had was a Jesus movement. It was a revolutionary movement inside of Judaism. They were Jewish. Now, yes, there was some separation happening in the early movement. And then you also have people who weren't Jewish step in, Gentiles, all right, which would be all of us if you're not Jewish, slowly wanting to get in, going, what do we have to do to be a part of this? That's where you get the whole debate. Because then you had like Judaism going, yeah, you can be a part. We're all about it. Come on, everybody's welcome. But we're going to need you circumcised. Why? Because that's what the law said in Moses. Have you ever read the Bible? Have you ever read most of what Paul writes about? A larger part of what Paul writes about is a whole debate on circumcision. That, again, that's the New Testament. We're like, kids, read the Bible. And tell your kids to read Paul. They're going to come back and be like, Dad, what's circumcision? I'm like, why is Paul so? Did you know this is in the Bible? Oh, it's going to get good. Did you know there is a verse where Paul says, he talks about circumcision, and he's so angry, he said, I wish they'd go and not just circumcise themselves, but cut it all the way off. That's the Bible, by the way. Now, that's a rough Cody translation, but it's in the Bible. It's in Paul, it's in the Bible. It's accredited to Paul. Yes. Why? Why? He's irate. What is he doing? He's saying, you don't have to do all of these things to get in. And there was this full-on debate between inclusion and what people had to do to actually get in. Translation, I don't know if much changed today. We created another religion off of a religion, and then we took this religion and we're like, if you want to get in, there's some things you need to do. And it became this whole debate. And this is why when you see a man in the New Testament baptizing a eunuch, it becomes real controversial because they're like, wait a minute, can that person get in? Because newsflash, that's kind of a transgender person. And is it okay to? And then you have Acts. Woo, Acts gets wild when all of a sudden you have Peter eating and drinking things that are against the law. And they're like hanging out with a Gentile, which, no, you can't be doing that. Why are you doing that? And then Peter's like, don't call anything unclean that God has made clean. Yeah, it's this whole large debate. And this is what I'm talking about. This is what is happening. You have this community, but they're not Christians per se yet, but they're a branch off of Judaism. Now, I am not saying they weren't called Christians, because early in Acts at Antioch, you have the first label of Christian. But check it out. It was empire and those around empire as somewhat of a, scholarship argues, a derogatory term that they tried to place on those people because they didn't want to offend all of Judaism. So they're like, what is up with this group of people, these Jesus people? They're in Judaism, but they're causing trouble. And so we have some historical records of people going, what would we call them people? Oh, little Christians, little Christ. But they had another, you know what their language was? They called each other, so if you're like, what did they call each other? The brothers and sisters, all through Acts. Hey, my brother. Hey, sister. I love that. We still do that today. It's one of my favorite things. I still love it. I own that one. I claim that one. I love it. Hey, brother. Now, it was used, hey, brother. Hey, brother. I love it. But I don't hear it in the Southern Baptist way anymore. I hear it in like the, yeah, we are brothers, aren't we? Yeah. You're my sister. Yeah, and here's another one they used. Oh, we're people of the way. That was actually their claim. When they're like, what are you people? People of the way. Well, what way is that? I'll tell you what, it wasn't the way of MAGA. Because the MAGA way and this way they were talking about do not have anything in common with each other. People of the way of what? This is what we're talking about in the sermon. The way of nonviolence. The way of turning the other cheek, the way of loving your neighbor, the way of loving God with all your heart, soul, and mind, the way of being a non-anxious presence in the world. Yeah, the way of learning how to look at fruit and decide what it produces but not be judgmental. Yes, this particular way. And we're going to get there. It's coming at the end of the sermon. Narrow is that way. And few people find it. But broad is the way, Romans road, that lead people to destruction. We're just riffing now. I bring that up because the people of the way were experiencing some persecution. And you have to ask, why? That's a good question. Because had they just been nice spiritual people that experience an individual spirituality and just want to go to heaven when they die, the empire would have loved that. But where did their persecution come from? It came from the empire, by and large. I mean, we could go back and look at 60 AD when Nero was the emperor. There was a great fire in Rome, and you know what happened in the temple? And you know what happened? Nero, the emperor, said, I'll tell you who did that. It's those Jesus people. And it created some serious conflict and persecution. We could go back and talk about how the empire continually persecuted individuals. As you roll through church history, you have 249 to 251 was the first empire-wide persecution. Then you had another 303 to 311 was called the Great Persecution. But in all those situations, from 60 Common Era all the way through the early 1st, 2nd century, The persecution was coming from the empire, and you have to ask the question, why? What was this group of revolutionaries doing that was so dangerous to the empire? Well, here's what I will tell you. Peace always threatens somebody's profits. Justice always threatens somebody's privilege. Love always threatens somebody's fear. And when faith begins, let's just modern day, feeding the hungry, confronting systems of why there is hungry people, welcoming the stranger, confronting racism, exposing corruption, confronting violence, and standing beside the people empire has taught us to fear. That's when power gets nervous. That's when the names begin. That's when the lies begin. That's when the pressure comes. And this happened in the early Jesus movement. I want to give you one example, and then I'll make two statements, and then we're out of here. First example. I want to read you a brief excerpt from a story of a bishop who experienced what I think Jesus is talking about here when he talks about persecution. This story, for those that are keeping score, is called the martyrdom of Polycarp. Polycarp was a bishop in Smyrna, modern-day Turkey. From 69 to 155 Common Era. The story that was written about him goes like this. The senator of the empire at the time set Polycarp on a chariot. And it reads this way. Taking him up into the chariot, they seated themselves beside him and endeavored to persuade him, saying, "What harm is there in saying, 'Lord Caesar,' or 'Caesar is Lord'? And in sacrificing with the other ceremonies observed on such occasions, and so make sure you remain safe." In context, what you need to know is public acknowledgement of the Caesar would happen by burning a few grains of incense on an altar before the statue of the emperor. And to refuse to burn incense before the statue of the emperor reminded them that they could not buy and sell in their marketplace. And to refuse this was equivalent with what they would deem as, we might call, treason. For the Romans, this sacrifice was just a simple patriotism, nationalism. I mean, come on. It's just a head nod. After all, we know Caesar isn't actually God. And you know that too. So just keep that belief, but just do it. That's the most seductive part of allegiance. The most seductive part of allegiance is that you don't even actually have to believe in it, you just have to go along with it. And so, Polycarp was brought into the arena. If you're unfamiliar, that's how persecution worked back then. Imagine the Colosseum filled with people. Brought into an arena, and as the script goes, it says that as he was brought into the arena in front of a crowd of people as they release animals, they said, "Swear by the fortune of Caesar. Repent." Isn't that interesting they use that? The empire used that to the Jesus guy. Repent and say, "Away with the atheist." Now, their understanding of atheism is completely different than ours. It's reversed in some ways. Atheism in that time, they would use that language to people like the Jesus people who refused to bow the knee to the Roman gods. So imagine that. We've gotten it all twisted, haven't we? We're like, "Hey, there's an atheist." Like, I hope Vinings Lake was like, "Oh, we're all a bunch of atheists." Polycarp's response, apparently, it's documented, standing in front of crowds of people in the arena, he said, 86 years I have served him, and he never did me any injury. How then can I right now blaspheme my King and my Savior? Those apparently were his last uttered words, and he was killed February 23rd, 155 A.D. So when Jesus says, blessed are the persecuted, they knew something about that. And when you hold that up to a world that claims persecution from a Coke can, I do that intentionally. Do you see how far we've come? Now, you might ask the question I asked, how did we get here? How did we get here from here? There's a lot of information that can be inserted inside of that, but I will tell you, something happened around 312. Some argue that's the moment Christianity actually began. But can I tell you what happened at 312? You had a ruler step up, an emperor named Constantine. And Constantine, for the first time, legalized Christianity, made it the religion of empire. And in that very moment, empire and religion got together and fused their powers. And it's no coincidence that right after that moment happened, what you began to have is what we call monasticism. Are you familiar with this? Monasticism would be what you might call the monks. And what happened is some Christians withdrew into the desert and wilderness and embraced celibacy, poverty, fasting, prayer, asceticism, and just a life of solidarity and silence. And they called it a new martyrdom. Why? This is so wild, y'all. Because they saw what happened. How this revolutionary movement went from being persecuted to getting power. And once they got power, here's what happened. They began to be the ones persecuting others. And so you had some people in that system going, something's not right. We got to get out of here. And so they left, went out to the deserts. You probably know them in history as the desert mothers and fathers. They went out and they said, to be a Jesus person, we need to experience not power, but some sense of pain. And so they would go out and live in such a way that if you saw it now, you'd be like, why is this person inflicting suffering on themselves? Part of it is because in their heart of hearts, they knew what they were seeing just wasn't what Jesus intended. And so I'll close here with the tragic turn history took. The Jesus movement went from being the people excluded to become the people doing the excluding. And there are two statements that I want to end with that I hope you hear. It turns out persecution never posed the greatest threat to the church. Power did. The moment Christianity stopped threatening empire, empire stopped threatening Christianity. And I just paused to say, what would it look like for Jesus followers, this revolutionary group, to once again become a threat to empire? Because we have buildings this morning all over this country, some mega, some tiny, and they're gathering on every corner. And if you live in the South, everywhere you look. But isn't it interesting? Very few, if any of them, are a threat to empire. My friends, the American empire, Trumpism, MAGA, they love the Church of America. And not only is the church not a threat to empire, they have snuggled right up to it. And it has become a weapon that is causing so much harm and pain and persecution in its broadest sense to a lot of marginalized people. And I'm here to tell you, friends, that is the antithesis to what Jesus is talking about when he says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted, for theirs is the kingdom of God." So the challenge for us, what would it look like for us to be on the radar of the empire? It's slowly happening. I just heard this week newly released records that the Department of Homeland Security is doing specific surveillance around progressive churches and anti-ICE organizations that are taking place in churches. I want to be careful. No one's claiming persecution. But I also want to say this. You do see how easily that could happen. Now follow me, because I know you're in this. But if and when that does happen, here's what you'll see. A whole bunch of Christians going, "We're persecuted," when they're the ones doing the persecuting. And here's what you'll see. If and when DHS slides into spaces that are harboring immigrants, you better believe they won't do it going, "We're the empire, we're Rome, you bow down, you will obey." No. They will slowly, quietly show up, and they will say, "We're Christians. We love Jesus, but you need to obey the law." But may we have enough discernment and wisdom to know, friends, we're not even close, but we are right on the edge of something happening in America where maybe for the first time in the history of our nation, we as a movement that started with Jesus get back to becoming a threat to empire. Because, as you know, the moment we stop becoming a threat to empire, empire stops threatening us. So I'll just pause and say, if you haven't been threatened in a while, maybe that's a metric. I don't know about you, but I've had a good number of threats. And here's what I'm saying. I hope you do too. I hope you do too. I hope you don't live in such a quiet way that no one ever even disagrees with you. Some people are like, "Yeah, but that's the way of Jesus." No. If it was, hear me, he would have never been crucified. Apparently that man was a loudmouth. Apparently he said some words. And apparently those words were very threatening to the power of the day. And so, we're done. I'm just saying, how would that translate to our world? Oh man. I hope and pray and dream of a revolutionary movement that gets back to what Jesus originally started, where the empire has to send code language to Mableton. Oh, we got something going over there. What's happening over there? Oh, they're harboring humans. Yeah, what are they talking about? What is something about love your neighbor? Why would love your neighbor be such a threat? When do they get back to their private spirituality? Start talking about heaven. Stop talking about politics. My friend, we're just getting started. We're getting started. We're going to be a threat to the powers that be. Why? Because I am convinced that is what the original Jesus movement was all about. So, here's the trouble. And as John Lewis would say, the great John Lewis in Georgia, how about we get in some good trouble? Because Jesus, should note this, Jesus said, blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness. Some of y'all getting persecuted for your own junk. Don't put that on God. For the sake of justice. You hear that, right? So good trouble is getting in trouble for the sake of justice.